So we have some big news to talk about today. Breaking news. Every week it appears we're reaching a new plateau of escalation on the World War III front. And guys, I got a lot of stuff to talk about today. I can't condense it all into the first 30 seconds. So if you got that TikTok brain disease, you're going to want to watch something else. Or if you want some unique insights, things you are not going to hear anywhere else, including data that you're not going to hear anywhere else, you better stick around because this is important. And pardon the lack of the illustrious big screen with the map and all the graphics. We are not resting on our laurels. I assure you, I'm not phoning this in. We do the same amount of research. I just haven't been able to go the extra mile and put together the on-screen presentation for you guys because we've been preoccupied trying to do some big league projects that, quite frankly, at this stage of the game are more important. They're educational. They don't always net the same amount of views, but they're educational for myself and for the committed, real preppers who actually watch them, okay? So let's talk about what has been going on today. Now, many of you are probably already aware that an F-35 was lost, an $80 million warplane that was the product of a $1.7 trillion program, I do believe. Well, they lost one. And a lot of people are saying that this is an embarrassment to the U.S. military. And while it is on the one hand, on the other hand, it is actually a testament to the stealthy capabilities. I mean, all jokes aside, the fact that they couldn't find their own plane for 24 hours is indicative that the technology works. Whatever sort of stealthy skin that they put on these things, it works. Now, around the same time, and more importantly, from our perspective, what was going on in command and control? Well, people were freaking out, apparently, because according to numerous Telegram channels and flight radar trackers on Twitter, there were numerous executive level planes that all vacated Washington, D.C. in and around the same time. Now, were they being taken away to the bunkers? Were they being taken away to Raven Rock? Were they just going for another gallivant on Epstein Island? Who knows? That was a joke, by the way, YouTube moderators. Who knows? But we do know that there is a heightened state of military activity, no matter how you slice it, not only in North America, but around the world, in terms of our strategic aviational capability. And understand that they're never going to tell us when we are at a heightened state of DEFCON combat readiness that would spook the population. The last thing the Fed right now needs, who is walking a razor's edge with the economy, is to have everybody get in a panic and pull their money out of the markets and then divest into gold and precious metals because they think that we're on the brink of nuclear war. No, they're never going to tell you. This is why Joe Biden has a 94% chance of surviving the apocalypse according to our own ratings. I know that sounds crazy, but it's the truth. He's the one who gets the word first. He's the one with the doomsday plane that takes him directly to the probably safest place on Earth that none of us are aware even exists yet. And the rest of us, we're the last to know. Typically, you're just going to see a bright light in the distance, okay? But you can bet that these things are somehow related. That is, this mass exodus out of Washington. Now, we're just seeing a lot of this stuff day after day. People are making videos about heightened amounts of strategic command, doomsday plane activity in the air in around North America and Europe. And this is just par for the course. And because of this increased amount of military activity, you're going to see more accidents like this with the F-35, especially now that we're in the age of cyber. We're entering the age of AI. Was this an AI mistake? A fellow prepper pointed that out to me on Twitter. This could have been an AI blunder. Was it a cyber attack? Was it a hack job? Who knows? But sure enough, before the truth could get its pants on, a lie had already spread around the world that this thing was hacked and sent to Cuba, okay? Now, when you get a piece of news like that, they were basically saying, okay, the Russians helped the Cubans hack this F-35 and it was on its way to Cuba. Now, understand that that would be an act of war if that happened. That's the definition of an act of war. Stealing a country's plane, hacking the plane, and bringing it to a rival nation is clearly an act of war. So right away, I knew that was just BS. Now, if it actually was And the United States is just saying that they found it in a Carolina field somewhere, like they're saying they found some debris. Notice that they didn't say the plane yet. So the plane could still be lost, and the debris they found could have been from the pilot ejecting or something, but they say it was 60 miles away from where the pilot ejected. So the fact that it probably likely never was the debris, because that would have likely have been within a mile or so proximity of where the pilot ejected. So no, I'm guessing that that is not what happened. If that is what happened, then we are on a much higher state of nuclear preparedness and combat readiness than is being publicly disavowed. We have a ton of other stuff that we got to talk about. We got a Bulgarian drone, or a drone that crashed in Bulgaria. Many of you by now are already familiar with what's going on in Romania. They're building bunkers, they're sending out alerts to the population that's proximate the Ukraine border. Now it's happened in Bulgaria. But the mystery about this one is they're not saying what kind of drone it is. It could be a Ukrainian drone for all we know. It could be a drone from a NATO exercise for all we know. We don't know. But we do know that things are popping off in the Black Sea day after day. There are fights happening there. There's a lot of stuff that we have to talk about that is going on in Russia as we speak. And the Russians apparently murked a depleted uranium storage facility, a depleted uranium ammo storage facility in Ukraine, which would in itself be a small-scale radiological disaster. Okay? Now, we don't know if that's true. This is from the Russia bros. I give it to you both, from the Ukraine bros, the Russia bros, because quite frankly, I simply don't know what is going on right now. You have Newsweek coming out today, and this is where the Russia bros fail. Sometimes they selectively take the mainstream media at their word, which is the craziest thing when you think about it. If you believed, or if you were in complete disbelief of everything the mainstream media said, and then suddenly they said something that you agreed with, and all of a sudden you took that at face value, that's inconsistent, okay? So Newsweek puts out this article, right? They say that it's time to start being honest about the situation in Ukraine, i.e. the counteroffensive is failing. And of course, most people who look at that start cheering right away as some sort of concession that the Russians are winning and that the Ukrainians have to start making some concessions. But they fail to get the subtext. You just got to think just a little bit more. What could the subtext possibly be there? Why is one of 20 Newsweek articles starting to talk about, well, maybe the counteroffensive isn't going so well, and, well, we've kind of been fudging the numbers a little bit all along? What they're trying to do, guys, I think, is they're trying to set the pretext for a boots-on-the-ground intervention, or just more intervention. Many people are saying, oh, well, they're going to now have to make concessions, right? No, they're going to do the complete opposite. They're going to say, we need to help Ukraine even more. So, understand that that is how the game is played. If you don't believe them when they're telling you what you don't want to hear, then don't believe them when they tell you when they do want to hear, okay? So just something to think about anyways. We'll come back to that as well. We just got to go over all the bullet points here. We have Ramzan Kadyrov releasing another video. If you don't know who this guy is, he's the Chechen leader, Putin's pit bull, Putin's bodyguard, his right-hand man, so to speak. Some people have said that he's very, very ill. He certainly doesn't look too well, and he hasn't looked very well for the last 3 months. And I'm somebody who is fairly sympathetic to the Russian perspective and trying to objectively analyze that situation, and I can say that he doesn't look so well. Him and Budanov, but Budanov looks better than him, at least right now. Budanov has fully recovered from whatever happened to him 2 months ago. Budanov is the Ukrainian intelligence head. Anyways, Kadyrov, if he falls, and if it's true that he's either in a coma or he's already died or he's very, very ill, then Putin has a big problem. Because Putin is able to maintain power by compartmentalizing all of his generals. And his generals of the various factions of his military. Some of them are more paramilitary style, like the Wagner organization. Of course, Prigozhin is no more. Others are the breakaway republics who have an allegiance to him as well. Others are different parts of the Russian military itself. And if you are going to rule in an authoritarian style, you absolutely have to do this sort of thing where you triangulate your generals, okay? And what has happened right now is Putin had two knights. One was Prigozhin and one was Kadyrov. One of those knights is down, so he's got to replace that one. He still has his rooks, which are the Russian MOD, the Ministry of Defense, and he still has his bishops, if you will. That would be like the propagandists and the Patriarch Kirill. He still has the support of the church and public opinion, okay? But if he loses Kadyrov, Chechnya potentially descends into chaos. I'm not saying it will. I don't know enough about the political situation there to truly know what would happen if Kadyrov left. Maybe nothing would change. Maybe he would just have a successor and they would be able to maintain control and they would be just as loyal to Vladimir Putin. I don't know, but it makes the situation complicated because if there was instability in Chechnya, then there might potentially spill over into Russia. And it's just one more problem, one more thorn in the side of Vladimir Putin as he's trying to basically fight the entirety of the developed Western world, okay? So whether or not Kadyrov is well or not, I don't know. He released a video, it was very, very short, and it's hard to say. It's almost like he's releasing videos right now just to kind of show that he's still alive, because maybe he got the order to do so. I don't know, or Putin phoned him up and said, hey, can you just go outside, leave your hospital bed for a second, walk around the rain and make it look like you're all right? He released a video a couple weeks ago with him on a treadmill, which I just found was odd because he did not look like he was having a good time. It did not look like something he was used to doing. And he was running at a relatively faster pace than somebody would expect for a person who was not doing so well and looking so good. So anyways, many nuclear weapons potentially coming to Ukraine, according to a former Central Intelligence Agency officer, but take it with a grain of salt, it's Ray McGovern. No disrespect to Mr. Ray McGovern, but this is a guy who's highly skeptical of the U.S. military-industrial complex for obvious reasons, as he rightfully should be. But using the terminology mini nuclear weapons in and of itself isn't descriptive enough, I think, to be taken entirely seriously by any OSINT analyst. So just something to consider. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Russian drone in Bulgaria. We'll go into depth about that. 3.5 million troops. According to a NATO admiral, Rob Bauer, announced that the alliance would be able to muster 300,000 troops at the drop of a hat if Russia decided to try something and overstep their borders. And that they could also bring 3.5 million NATO troops to bear, that was the combined amount of their forces. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. You know, in NATO's case, the whole is less than the sum of its parts, because in Russia's case, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. If they have an army of 1.5 million who are all working towards the same common goal, that is far superior than an army of 10 million of a combination of 35 different countries who are only ever going to give their B-rate players. So think about it. You're a country, you're never going to give your best. I mean, the United States is a testament to that. They won't even give the Ukraine 30 tanks. Ukraine, sorry. Offended somebody out there, I know, because I misspoke once. Offended you. Jeez, I completely lost my train of thought. There's a reason why we're not sending them our best stuff, because we want to keep it for ourselves. So you have what will be 33 countries. Ukraine will be the 33rd, as crazy as that sounds. Speaking of which, the United States just crossed the $33 trillion debt threshold. Maybe we'll get some time to talk about that. But understand that the 3.5 million troops, what you're really getting there is maybe a handful of that's ever going to be committed by any given country. Countries are going to hoard 80% of their military equipment unless they're on the front lines. As Russia begins to chip away, that's when those countries, like we've seen with the Baltic states, like we've seen to some extent Poland, who's given a lot of its Soviet-era equipment, of course, it's all been replaced by American stuff. So even them, they're never going to give everything unless it's a do or die situation, which it pretty much is for the Baltics. But it's not for the UK. It's not for France. It's not for Germany or Spain or Portugal or anybody else in the NATO alliance. And it sure as hell isn't necessarily an existential threat to the United States, at least not in the militaristic sense. It is in the financial sense, as we've talked about ad nauseum on this channel with respect to the US dollar waning. But 3.5 million troops from a schizophrenic milieu of different countries with all different cultures, different languages, and just the interoperability of that whole thing. There's a reason why they put the 300,000 number out there, because that's as good as what you're really going to get. So you're going to have NATO who has 300,000 troops going up a hardened Russian military, and they can only hope that they're going to be able to retain what remains of Ukraine, because Ukraine is the strongest military power in Europe at this point in time, in the western part of Europe. They're going to be the ones taking the lead on all this because they're the ones that have been fighting. They're experienced fighters on the front lines. So conventionally, the Russians have NATO beat. Again, if you're just looking at a one-to-one comparison of the numbers, it's going to say that NATO has such and such amount of GDP, they have this amount of people, they have this amount of tanks and equipment and all this stuff and military personnel. But you have to understand that that's all fractured into those various countries, and each individual country is never going to commit the best forces until Russia is knocking on its doorsteps, and that is how Russia incrementally is able to make progress into Europe. First they take down Ukraine, then because there's nothing between them and the Baltics after that, asides this very tenuous commitment that NATO will come to their aid if Article 5 is invoked, which nobody really truly believes anyways. I don't think that they're going to risk everything, including nuclear Armageddon, to save a small country like Latvia. So this is why those Baltic state countries are throwing everything they possibly can into this fight. And Senator Graham came out today, Lindsey Graham, and openly stated, I couldn't even believe he said this. I think it was today that he said this. It might have been from a previous press conference. It doesn't matter when he said it. But he basically said that all we have to do is keep sending them weapons and they will fight to the last Ukrainian. I mean, think about how dehumanizing that is for any Ukrainian that would be listening to that, to know that you are just a human resource, an expendable asset whose life has no value as ours do here in the Western world, okay? It's just absolutely insane. What else do we got going on? We got a MiG-31 intercepting a P-8A Poseidon up there in around the North Pole. Now, again, military activity abound from the Barents Sea to the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea to Kaliningrad. I mean, the amount of recon planes that are in the air nowadays, it's head spinning. And I don't even really pay much attention to it anymore. We've come to that level of normalization. The emergency action messages are every single day. There appears to be more and more. And so we've just reached a new plateau of escalation. And, the economy is not doing so well either. And China, apparently, 103 People's Liberation Army aircraft and 9 planned vessels were detected around Taiwan between 6 a.m., 1 a.m. Moscow time on Monday. So the incursions towards Taiwanese airspace are only ramping up, and it's only a matter of time because China continues to move military equipment, it would appear, towards the province that is just on the other side of the Taiwan Strait. So it's only a matter of time before they have everything in place, and one of these exercises or incursions is actually real world. And what they're trying to do is exhaust Taiwan's ability to fight back, because every time Taiwan scrambles jets, they got to put more mileage on the plane, they got to do more maintenance work, and it's a big pain in the arse economically and just in terms of their ability to maintain their equipment. So it's not looking good at all. What else do we got going on here? Americans will be broke by October. All of the savings that they've acquired since the pandemic, or that were accrued throughout the pandemic, have now basically been exhausted in order to just keep pace with inflation. We have oil prices touching $100 a barrel once again. Russia is laughing its ass off, and the U.S. Strategic Oil Reserve is still flying at half-mast. My friends, it's only going to get worse. The Fed is not going to be able to control inflation. Now I'm seeing all kinds of crazy stretches of the imagination and mental gymnastics required to get us to believe that inflation is actually coming down and that core inflation is what matters, and the price of food and shelter and gasoline, the things that you spend the most amount of money on, the things that you need to survive, oh, those things don't matter anymore. In fact, they're starting to talk about how death, maybe that was a Freudian slip, debt is a sign of wealth. I watched a piece on NBC. I posted this on Twitter. If you guys want to hear, maybe what I think, what I really think, go and subscribe to my Twitter account. But CNBC, or was it MSNBC, one of those places, NBC, they were talking about how, it's actually a good thing that we blow up this debt balloon even more. And it was some sort of reverse correlation, causation thing where, countries that have more debt tend to have more wealth. And while that is true, that's really just a sign that it's not real wealth. I mean, if you go and you look at the top 20 economies in the world, they're also the ones with the greatest amount of debt. Now, what is money? Money is debt. Yes, but that can still get wildly out of control, as it has with the derivative bubble that is currently being blown up right now, which is why precious metals, freeze-dried food, preps, hard assets, those are the things that I personally, tangibles, I'm trying to get my hands on at the moment. But it never ceases to amaze me, the lengths that they will go to lie to us, and they'll do it so well that most people won't even realize what's happening. The big money is planning on another black swan event. In fact, I probably should have said this first. I do have a little insider insight, if you will, with respect to what's going on with the food industry. Now, some of you know, because we've been doing videos about it, we're going to be interviewing the owner and probably release that video in the next couple days of Freeze Dry Wholesale. This is a very important company when it comes to continuity of government, because they're the ones who stock the U.S. embassies around the world. They're the ones that stock the military bunkers, the nuclear submarines, you name it. They play a very big role in providing the U.S. military and politicians, high-profile people with food. So they're somewhat a leading indicator of whether or not shit's going to hit the fan. And I can tell you with certainty, and I'm not going to spill all the beans of that interview that I'm going to release in a few days, but you're definitely going to want to tune into that one, okay? Because there's a lot of very high-profile people stocking up right now. There's a lot of U.S. embassies that are stocking up right now. There's a lot of more purchasing from not only militaries, but only the U.S. military, but also people within, personal, for personal consumption, okay? But in addition to that, they have to now raise their prices by 10 to 15%. That's a huge leap. And it's not because they're trying to get rich. I know Steve Syros, you guys watch the interviews, you can tell this guy's a genuine guy, and he really does care about the products that he makes. And I can tell you, you can tell by just the quality of the food that it's second to none. The only close second is Nutri-Store, to be really honest. And they don't have as many varieties, okay? But it's still top quality stuff. But Steve was telling me how lots of large producers in the U.S., they don't want to do agreements beyond 60 to 90 days right now, which is abnormal. And maybe not for the last 3 years, but it's abnormal, when you think that things are supposed to be stabilizing. So there's no pricing agreements and no supply agreements that extend beyond 3 months. So do they know something that we don't? This potentially tells him, and I'm reading a few snippets of his email here, trying not to disclose anything that I shouldn't disclose, that they either don't think prices are done climbing, or they think they're not going to be able to deliver, okay? They're not going to be able to get the food, or the prices are going to be much, much higher. So he says that this is all incredibly bizarre. And is this because there's a black swan event on the horizon? Is this in anticipation of much higher energy costs down the road? Is this because there's going to be poor harvests all around the world this year, which is why countries like India and China are now stockpiling grain? And now, thanks to Justin Trudeau, we are now in India's bad books, which is probably not a good thing. I'm not saying there's no legitimacy to the claims that he's saying, but anyways, speaking of Trudeau, this is very significant because he called an emergency meeting, and this was an emergency meeting with the top 5 grocers in Canada. They provide 80% of the food that Canadians consume here, and he called an emergency meeting because there's concerns that there's price gouging and record profits, as it's being called. These companies deny this. Most grocery stores operate on very thin margins, especially with their produce. I think actually they lose money on produce. Most grocery stores do. So anyways, in all of his infinite wisdom, he decides that the best way to resolve this problem is to tax these companies even more. Well, when you understand that even if what they're saying is true, that the grocers are making record profits, okay? They're making possibly 2 to 4% margin. Really, it's probably more like 1% margin. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but when you're dealing in billions and billions of dollars, it's a lot. That's after you pay all your employees, etc., and then you pay out your shareholders and, that sort of thing. So 1% ain't much unless you're a giant mega corporation. Now, what are the grocers going to be able to do? Give us 0.5% off per each dollar, so which would be 0.5 cent off each dollar that we invest. How is that going to help? Canadians right now need increased purchasing power in their currency, which they're not going to get for many, many years until inflation is completely brought under control, which is not going to happen anytime soon. We're not even seeing true disinflation yet in terms of food, much less deflation. And we really need to get to deflation, which is years away, in order to see any noticeable difference. So you need 20, 30, 50% reduction in the cost of food for it to be manageable, for people to not have to go into debt, okay? And we're not going to get that, guys. This is just the government's way of saying, well, we tried, we did something, we made it look as though we were trying to do something. All this is going to do is probably create instability in the markets. It might even lead to more consolidation. These handful of grocers, maybe they're not going to survive this. Maybe there's only going to be one that comes out on top. And yay, we have one mega corporation now that is just beholden to whatever sort of government is in power. Once again, that's called fascism. We're on the brink of rationing, food stamps, a card that you take that has your daily allotment of calories, and you can pick between such and such. You can only have one meat, just like the old ration books, okay? I'm going to actually show you guys an old ration book from the war, World War II, and it limited the amount. You could have one meat, you could pick one stick of butter, and this and that, and you really had to ration things, okay? And it was, I could foresee that coming back, because when you try to do price controls with things like that, it just, especially as we're in a global market, and the price of grain and wheat and rice and all these staple commodities is set globally for the most part, it just messes with everything, and companies can't compete, and it just messes with the whole capitalist system, as it were. So that's not looking good. Either way, the price of everything is going up. Steve, the guy who owns Freeze Dry Wholesale, has agreed to extend or postpone the price hikes. And he's done this for me for 3 weeks now, as I'm trying to get everybody to stock up as quickly as you can. Look, food prices have not come down in 70 years. Food inflation is just baked into the cake of this whole pyramid scheme that is the monetary fiat paradigm, okay? So the price of food is only going to escalate. So if you are wanting to get prepared, one of the best ways you can do that is to store non-perishable foods, because it's only going to increase in value. I heard something completely asinine from one of our local reporters today, and I usually never listen to local talk radio because, quite frankly, it's Saskatchewan and nobody does, which is not to disparage my Saskatchewanian brethren, but let's face it, nobody really cares, okay? And if I was doing local news in Saskatchewan, aside the people in the immediate environment, I don't expect anybody to care globally anyways. But this guy, his name's Murray Wood on CKOM, he comes on and he's talking about, well, what about these preppers? They do these 1-minute spiels where they just talk about something controversial. And one of the things was, what are these preppers going to do when their food expires? And are they going to be very disappointed when the apocalypse doesn't come? And it's just a very rudimentary criticism of the whole thing that's, we've heard for years and years, that there's so many very eloquent ways that I could repudiate what he's saying. But the gist of it is that, number one, this stuff is going to last longer than most people. Freeze-dried food they say 25 years, really it's a lifetime, okay? So it's never going to go bad. Most people are cycling their pantries anyways, and to the prospect of it just somehow miraculously going bad and it being deemed a waste, well, look at insurance. People, on average, spend almost $500,000 collectively on all of the different types of insurances that you might pay for. Fire insurance, life insurance, car insurance, and most people will never have to utilize that. So was it a waste? No, it wasn't a waste because you needed it. Some people are legally obligated to have it, and maybe they wouldn't do it unless the government mandated it. But ask yourself, if the government is mandating you to have car insurance, why aren't they mandating you to have some preps? Okay, why aren't they mandating you to have a certain amount of ammunition at all times? Well, I mean, the answer to that question is obvious, right? They don't want people to be self-reliant. They don't want people to think independently, because that goes against what ultimately is us building our own prison via feeding the AI algorithms. If you want to learn more about that, go and check out the video that I released last night. Now, Russia destroying, murking Ukrainian capabilities on September 16th. The Russians carried out 11 group attacks against armed forces of Ukraine. In particular, the military attacked port infrastructure. Oh, that wasn't the story that I'm looking for. The story I'm looking for is the one where they took out a huge supply of Storm Shadow missiles and what were they? Depleted uranium rounds. So I guess we're told by the Rafael Grossi, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency head, which is totally beholden to the NATO oligarchs. Well, he says that, depleted uranium is no big deal. Everybody's doing it, right? But so I guess we don't have to worry about it. But I'm guessing that there's some guys in hazmat suits, if it's true what the Russia bros say, that Russia was able to take out a depleted uranium storage facility, not depleted uranium, but the depleted uranium rounds that are going to be used in the Abrams tanks and the Challenger tanks. Well, then I assure you that that's a radiological incident. And maybe that's why Newsweek is starting to say, yeah, looks like we're going to have to give more support. These guys are not going to back down from this war. They're never going to back down from this war. The American fiat empire is at stake. We are at $33 trillion in debt. $33 trillion. At the start of the pandemic, it was around 20. In 3.5 years, it's gone up, where's my brain? $13 trillion. Now, I know the occult-loving, illuminated ones love them numerology, and they love them a good number 13. But it's not a good number when it comes to, this is hyperinflation. I mean, if you ever were to look at it, when you go back in time, 100 years from now, and they say, what happened? They're going to say, how did they not see that most of the debt, most of the money in circulation was printed since 2020, but most of the debt now in the next couple years is going to be since 2020. I mean, that is absolutely insane. And we still all have the gall to believe that this thing is just going to keep on going and going. And oh yeah, debt's great because, countries who have more debt are wealthier. Well, yeah, it works that way to a certain extent, so long as you can fool the people. But you can't fool all the people all the time, right? Many Ukrainians are getting sent nuclear weapons. Many nuclear weapons are going to get sent to Ukraine. I was just talking about this the other day. how they're going to get it all. Eventually, you're going to see nuclear weapons in Ukraine. This is from Ray McGovern now, so take it with a grain of salt. He's a Russia bro, well, not really a Russia bro, but he tries to view things, from both sides. He's an anti-war activist, anti-CIA, former CIA. For all we know, he's still CIA. You know how that whole line goes. But he's trying to say that they're going to get tactical nukes. Now, that may well be the case at some point. We've seen time and time again that neither side, that a lot of sides are just flexing. When they say escalation, they really mean, well, we're gonna up the ante a little bit more, but we're not going to cross the nuclear line yet. What the Russians are talking about now, okay, is they are openly talking about targeting some of our critical infrastructure, targeting NATO warships, because they're about to call NATO's bluff. They're about to see if we are really, truly willing to respond in a conventional sense, much less a nuclear sense. And while that might inspire confidence around maybe we wouldn't take this thing to the ultimate strategic nuclear level, and that maybe they're going to never go to that extent, and these nuclear weapons are all for show, but I highly doubt that, it gets us ever so close to a situation where we can't pull out of. It's called a fait accompli. And it means that we've passed the point where we can stop something. Okay, it's an untenable state of affairs. It's like a past the event horizon, past the Rubicon, and we get to a point where we are in a Cuban Missile Crisis, but everywhere along the front in Europe. Okay, and that is not a situation where we certainly want to find ourselves. So, I don't know. I mean, is it possible? He says the next logical step for the Biden administration to take is arming Kiev with a mini nukes or tactical nukes. Now, you could say, well, no, they still have to do longer range weapons, and they still can do, more fancy-dancy F-35s that will get lost because they're so great and stealthy. But, the leap from an F-16 to an F-35 isn't that great, I don't think. It's a more stealthy fighter and the capabilities are there, but I think the real only leap after that is nuclear weapons, to be honest, and troops on the ground, but they might never do that. They might commit some coalitional force that is independent of NATO before they ever fully commit. Now, Bulgaria, I briefly talked about this. They claim that a Russian kamikaze drone went down near Telenovo in Bulgaria, which is in and around the Black Sea, very close to where the Romanians were hit with the Russian drones. But there is no real proof that it was a Russian drone, at least not yet, at least not to be able to confirm from the pictures. They detonated this thing. Obviously, we're just one step closer as Russia needs to continue to target closer and closer to the ports to nip this problem in the bud. We have MiG-31 intercepts the P-8A Poseidon plane, a U.S. Navy Poseidon fighter jet that was approaching its airspace over the Barents Sea. Russian airspace control authorities detected the target, approached it, and the Poseidon turned around and went on its merry way, and the thing didn't escalate any further. But, even the thing that happened last year when the Russians allegedly fired on the UK warplanes or the UK recon plane that had 30 crew members on it, this happened last year, and NATO didn't talk about that. Okay, they didn't publicly say anything about it at the time, which tells you that they're not ready to fight the Russians, conventionally, possibly nuclear, in a nuclear sense. And you notice the same thing happened with Romania as well. They were very hush-hush about it at first. They didn't even admit that it happened. Ukraine is saying, hey, there's clearly a drone that's right there. You can see it on the satellite. You can see it. There's pictures of it. It crashed there, and the Romanians were like, okay, we'll investigate it. But there wasn't a huge uproar right away. Not like what happened in Poland last year, when immediately there was an emergency meeting convened and, they were going to invoke Article 4 and all that stuff. None of that happened this time. So and if it's true that the Russians fired on the RAF and they knew that at the time and they didn't make it publicly known, imagine what else they're not telling us. Imagine how much this thing is escalating behind the scenes that we don't even know. For all we know, this F-35 stuff was somehow cyber related. Okay? And even now they're trying to downplay the whole Chinese balloon thing, and it seems as though they're trying to walk back some things in an attempt to be more diplomatic. But the Chinese and the Russians, they're just going to get stabbed in the back again, just like that Annalena Baerbock, the German defense minister, came out the other day and called Xi Jinping a dictator. I mean, they know that the West can't be trusted. We simply can't be trusted. Our leaders are full of shit. And when you have, just like Rafi Farber says, when the crux of your complete monetary system is a lie, that is the creation of the fractional reserve banking system, the creation of debt in the place of real money, everything that is built on top of that system is also a lie. So it's like a corruption tree, okay? And everything that's an offshoot of our flawed, corrupt monetary system, because that's the base of this whole thing, is also corrupt. So you can't ever expect to be able to negotiate in good confidence with a country that is at its core is corrupt, like right to the core. So for that reason, keep on prepping, keep on stacking it to the rafters. I'm sure I missed something, and I'm sure in the time that I did this video, the shit's already hitting the fan somewhere else, guys. For the next couple days, we're going to be very busy. We are doing some tactical training. We're learning how to ride horses.